So the purpose of that short meditation, private meditation, was or is to help us see how we think that we're seeing an objective situation out there, and we think that how we're describing it to ourselves is how it objectively is. But actually, we're interpreting it. We usually put a lot of judgment on it, a lot of projection, a lot of psychoanalyzing the other person. And so how we're seeing the situation, which we think is objective, is actually something projected by our mind, our own confused mind. And then we're reacting to it as if it were really that way. Whereas if we can see the error in how we're projecting and how we're describing the situation to us, then we can instead look at the situation from a more realistic and beneficial viewpoint. When we see a situation from a different perspective, and then our experience in the situation is completely different, even though the situation itself is the same. Okay? So what it's showing us very much is that our mind is the source of our happiness and our pain. So I'll just give you a little bit of the situation I was thinking of as an example to show you how to do this. Yeah. So I was thinking of a situation where somebody, okay, I'll tell you how I initially described it, okay? Here was an adult having a childish temper tantrum, stamping her feet, crying, blaming others, not communicating well, and demanding that other people do what she wants. Okay. You got this picture? You ever met anybody like that? I bet. I know it's never been you. We don't act that way. Other people act that way. We are reasonable, kind people. They are completely childish. Okay, look at the way I described it. There was an adult having a childish temper tantrum. Is that an objective description? No. Yeah, childish is evaluating it. Temper tantrum is saying what it was. Yeah. If I asked that person, are you having a childish temper tantrum? They wouldn't have said yes. They would have said, I'm really unhappy. Okay? So then, how did I describe it? She was blaming everybody else for her problems, accusing them of not treating her properly, and manipulating everybody so that they would feel guilty and do things her way. How much of that is objective fact? Nothing of it, is it? Yeah. All of it is my interpretation. I'm interpreting what she's saying. I know I have the capacity to read her mind and know her true motive. Yeah. And know her true character. She is selfish, inconsiderate, and she's manipulative. How do you like that? Yeah. And this is how we describe people to ourselves, don't we? Yeah. Having a childish temper tantrum, being selfish, inconsiderate, and manipulative. Yeah. All of which is my projection of her motivation, my interpretation of her behavior. And then the crowning jewel to all of this is she's got to be bipolar or what's the other one? Passive aggressive. Because that's what we do nowadays. You know, I'm not a therapist, but we all psychoanalyze people, don't we? We give them a label. Once we've given them a label, then that explains the whole thing. Okay? So we are all amateur psychologists, right? So it's interesting, in that whole thing I just gave you, none of it is any kind of accurate description of what was going on, just the bare, raw, visible, data of what was happening. It was all my judgment, evaluation, interpretation, mind reading, and so on. So of course, if I describe somebody else's behavior like that, in that way, then what's my emotional reaction going to be to it? Yeah, I'm mad. I'm mad because they're trying to manipulate me and I will not be manipulated. They're blaming people and I didn't do anything wrong. Do you see that hardness come back in? I didn't do anything wrong. I will not let anybody manipulate me. There's a hardness in the mind, very inflexible. And I am now, not only, I'm seeing her as blaming everybody else for her problems, but now I am blaming her for my being upset. She makes me so angry that she behaves like that. She's always doing this. Always, as if that person doesn't have any other behavior. Yeah. She made me mad, as if the anger were in her and it came out of her and hit me like a virus so that I got angry without anything happening in me that contributed to it. All her fault, or all his fault. Any of that actually what's going on? Did that other person make us angry? As if anger were a virus that is hanging on their words, and according to the words they say, the words come out of their mouth with the virus covering, the virus of anger covering them. And the words, those sound waves, they're all sound waves, right? Sound waves are coming, sound waves are coming. And as soon as those sound waves hit my ear, I got infected with anger, and it's all their fault. They made me angry. I had no choice. This is another undertone. I had no choice except to be angry. Yeah. Isn't that when we get angry, how we describe it to ourselves? I had no choice. Every reasonable person would be upset if this kind of thing happened to them. Everybody would be upset. I'm not unusual. I'm not making this up. It's completely normal. And it's their fault. Right? Right? Completely their fault. And when we give them the psychoanalytic approach, then that's really the crown jewel. Because now we have an official label for what it is. So it's very interesting. Look at situations in which you got upset. You have to be willing to say, I was upset or I was angry. If you can't admit to that, then you're really stuck. Yeah, because then you don't even realize something has happened. So you have to be able to identify anger and admit to feeling angry or admit to being upset. And then, see how our mind is creating this whole situation. And then you flip it. And how else can I look at the situation that is a more realistic viewpoint? So from a Buddhist perspective, some ways to look at that situation would be, here's a suffering sentient being. That person who's having that childish temper tantrum and blaming everybody. Can we see beyond that and see here's a suffering sentient being who's extremely confused at this moment? And who is basically saying through their behavior, I'm unhappy and I'm confused. And I don't know what to do to help myself. That's essentially what that person is saying, isn't it? Can we take that in? Or does our mind automatically go back to, but they're blaming me unfairly and they're manipulating and I will not be manipulated? Or can we really take it in? There's somebody who's unhappy and confused and doesn't know how to help themselves at this moment. So that's one way of looking at the situation. Another way of looking at the situation from a mind training or thought training perspective would be, why am I experiencing this? Why am I here right now experiencing this and being so happy, so unhappy? It's because of the actions I've done prior to this. It's due to the karma I have created. If you're familiar with this one poem, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, it talks about the actions we do being like a boomerang, and we experience something similar to what we made other people experience before. So can we see this as, oh, well, why am I sitting here being the object of somebody else's blame being accused of being the reason for their behavior, their temper tantrum, their unhappiness. Why? Because chances are I've probably done something similar in the past. Have you ever had a temper tantrum? Temper tantrum is what kids have. But even when you start out, when you were a kid, did you ever have a temper tantrum when you were a kid? My parents recorded one. An 8mm. It was one of the first things they took after they got an 8mm camera way back when, was me having a temper tantrum. It's there for all all the future to see. So as adults, we don't like to say I had a temper tantrum. We like to think of ourselves as grown up. But we actually have grown up temper tantrums, don't we? We just learn how to mask our temper tantrums a little bit. Yeah. So what sometimes do you do when you get very upset? Maybe you yell and scream at your partner. Or maybe you turn around, slam the door, and go away and don't talk to them for a week. Those are adult temper tantrums. But they're temper tantrums, aren't they? So chances are we did something like that. Maybe earlier this life, maybe previous life. But what we're experiencing now is actually the karmic result of our own behavior. So the motto of that story is, if we don't like the result, don't create the cause. If we don't like other people yelling and screaming and crying and blaming us, then don't yell and scream and cry and blame them. Or even you don't scream, don't yell. Or even you don't yell. Don't slam the door and refuse to talk. Okay? So if we see the situation from a different viewpoint, then all of a sudden the anger fizzles because there's no reason for it anymore. Why am I experiencing this? Because I did something like this in the past towards somebody else. What motivated me to act in that way? My own self-centered mind. So who's the real villain in this story that's making me unhappy? Is it the other person? No. Because the real cause is my own self-centered mind that made me act in that kind of way in the past, so that now I'm experiencing the karmic result of the energy that I put out in the universe is coming back to me. So who's there to be angry at? Not another person. My real enemy is my self-centered mind. That's the real villain. And the self-centered thought is not me. Okay? Me and the self-centered thought are not union, oneness, undifferentiatable. Yeah. There's a conventional person, me. And then there's this thought. All it is a thought says, I am the most important one in the world. Do you have that thought? Now, we're usually too polite to admit it. But we're with friends. I think we can admit it. We all have that thought, don't we? Whose happiness is most important on this planet? Yeah? There's over 7 billion human beings. Whose happiness is most important? You happen to be sitting in front of her right now. Yeah? This is 1 out of 7 billion. You hit the jackpot. And if you only realized that my importance, that is my benefit and happiness, is the most important thing, then you would change your behavior to correspond with what makes me happy. And then we would all live happily ever after. Because you would all be doing what I wanted you to do. Sounds like a good recipe for world peace, doesn't it? Yeah? You just drop everything and realize that your purpose of existence is to make me happy and do what I want. Even though sometimes I'm not quite sure what I want you to do. You're supposed to figure it out and do it before I even have to say it. It's like that, isn't it? And the only problem is that you think the exact same thing about yourself. That's the real problem. Is that you think you're the most important one. You don't realize how wrong you are. I'm the most important. So that you can see, why we have a lot of disharmony on this planet. Because we're all thinking that. And expect the rest of the world to go along with it. And the rest of the world doesn't comply. Which is why other people are so dumb. Yeah? They're so dumb, they don't realize that I'm the most important. So they do all these stupid things because they think they're important. These sentient beings, so dumb. That's what we think, isn't it? Really, who's the dumb one? Who's the stupid one? It's this one that thinks everybody else should be at my beck and call. So that I just snap my fingers, or I just have a thought, or even before I have the thought, you know what it is and do what I want. So it kind of boils down to my self-centered thought and my incorrect conception of who I am. Because I think I'm some kind of solid, real person here. I'm not really solid and real. I'm actually made up of many, many parts and came about due to many causes and conditions. But I don't realize that. And instead, I think I'm here simply because I'm here. It's a big misunderstanding of myself as well. So that's a little bit about where anger originates from and how it develops. So one of the first things we learn in Buddhist practice is that our mind is the cause of our happiness and suffering. And that what we are seeing through our senses, or what we think we're seeing, and how we're describing it to ourselves, is not an objective reality. That a lot of things are dependent on causes, conditions, hearts, and how we conceive them and what name we give to them. That creates a lot of our reality. Let me give you an example of that. I know some of my Israeli friends are here. How many of you are Israeli? Okay. So, some years ago, I was leading a retreat in the Negev. Were you there? Yeah. So the kibbutz where the retreat was right along the Jordanian border. So you had the land where the kibbutz was. There was a fence, barbed wire fence. Then there was some raked sand, and then there was Jordan, just the desert. The raked sand was so if anybody tried to cross, their footprints would be seen in the sand. I had to ask, why did you rake the sand? This is what they told me. Okay. So one afternoon, during the break time in the retreat, I stood there at the fence, and I looked at the sand on that side, and I looked at the sand on this side. And that sand was called Jordan. And this sand was called Israel. And I wondered what happened when there was a sandstorm. And some of Jordan came into Israel. Or some of Israel went into Jordan. Were they going to have a war to get their land back? Because these grains of sand were the country. It was so interesting standing there, thinking that. And then how people, develop this idea of this is my land, my country. Here's the line in the middle of sand. It's sand. It's just sand, like what you put in your cat's litter box. But there's a line. And this is your sand, and this is my sand. And don't you put your foot on my sand. I wonder what would happen if the cat crossed the border. Cats, you're a Jordanian cat, and this is an Israeli cat. You better look where you go pee. Otherwise, you might get shot. Very interesting. So, in our mind, we look at something and then we create the notion of mind. We conceptualize mind and give it the label mind. And then everybody else is supposed to know it's mine. And if you don't know, When we say mind, we feel an intense feeling of ownership, don't we? Yeah, this is mine. My package of tissues. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah, it's so neat. It has flowers on it. Yeah, this is my package of tissues. I'm going to use it when I need to blow my nose. If you're my friend, I may give you a tissue. If you're my enemy, forget it. Unless I happen to be in a very magnanimous mood. And then I will take a tissue out and give it to you. But this is mine. So, this microphone is not mine.
We talked a lot about anger for someone, but what about anger for yourself?
Very good question. What about anger for ourselves? Everybody have anger at themselves sometimes?
Yes.
Sometimes I think anger at ourselves is an actual worse problem than anger at others, although the two are related. Because when we're angry at ourselves comes from being very, very self-critical. The more expert we become at picking our own faults, the better we become at picking out other people's faults. And the more habituated we are with picking our faults, the more habituated we become at finding the faults of other people. Yeah. So those two things are very much related. Again, as I mentioned last night, when we were talking, a lot of this self-talk that we have, such as I make everything go wrong, I hate myself. Why? Because I botch up everything. I make everything go wrong. So I hate myself for that. Well, that's a bit of an extreme statement. And like I said, saying I make everything go wrong is really a bit arrogant. It means we have great power. We are so powerful that without any other factors, we can make everything a mess. Yes, that's really unrealistic, isn't it? So a lot of this, you're not saying yes. It is unrealistic, isn't it? So, when we get into this thing of self-hatred and self-criticism, the whole thing is just a huge exaggeration. We are not that powerful. We cannot make everything go wrong. The whole thing didn't fall apart just because of me. What does the Buddha teach? They often say if the Buddha had one slogan, it would be dependent arising. Dependent arising, which means that things arise dependent on other things. They don't come into existence, they don't function, they don't change because they're self-enclosed entities. They function and change and exist because they're dependent on causes and conditions and parts. And, we were talking just about the mind that conceives and labels things. So thinking that we all by ourselves with no other causes and conditions necessary can make everything go wrong is totally unrealistic because nothing operates like that. Yeah. Everything operates in relationship to something else. What I've found very often, that I think is very interesting, is that we take responsibility for things that are not our responsibility, and we don't take responsibility for things that are our responsibility. And a lot of self-hatred, I think, and self-anger is because we take responsibility for things that actually are not our responsibility. Okay? For example, you may say something to a friend, and inside yourself, your motivation is one of trying to help somebody. You know, maybe your friend is doing something that they're starting down a slippery slope into some kind of problem, and you see that, so you want to warn your friend and make them kind of wake up and see what's happening. So you caution them about something, and you're doing it because you care about your friend. Then your friend misunderstands and gets furious at you, saying to you, "What kind of friend are you? I've always been good to you, now you're criticizing me, you're not standing by me, you're doing this, you're blaming me, you're blah, 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 blah." Okay, and accusing us of all sorts of stuff, even though we had a motivation of kindness. Okay, so they blame us. Then we think, oh, I really bungled it. This is all my fault. The problems we're having in the friendship now is because I just spoke too soon and I said the wrong thing, and so of course my friend is upset with me, you know, it's my fault. So that is a good example of taking responsibility for something that's not our fault. Because our motivation was one of kindness, our intention was to help our friend, and simply because of what was going on inside of them, simply because they misunderstood and they got upset, then we blame ourselves because we think we are responsible for their unhappiness. Okay? In that kind of situation, we have no responsibility for their unhappiness. We had no intention to cause it. In fact, we didn't cause it. Why is that person unhappy? Because their internal storytelling mechanism got triggered. Yeah. They're clinging on to their honor or their reputation or something. Yeah. So just because they're angry, it doesn't mean that we're bad people. They're angry because they have the seed of anger in them, and because they misunderstood and they were very sensitive about something that they didn't need to be sensitive about. So in that situation, there's no reason for us to think, I am responsible for their happiness. In actual fact, we can't make anybody else happy beyond ourselves. Yeah? Going through life trying to make other people happy, you know, it's a risky business. Because what's going to make somebody else happy from one moment to the next changes. I mean, look at us. What makes us happy from one moment to the next changes, doesn't it? So the other people are the same thing. And in the same way, really, other people cannot make us happy. We have to make ourselves happy. We can't make other people happy. So in that situation, we are not responsible for their unhappiness. We are responsible for our own actions. In this case, we said something with care, out of concern to try and help. No reason to hate ourselves because they're upset. Now, in other situations, it's really funny. Well, it's not so funny actually, but we do things deliberately to antagonize other people. And then when they get upset, we deny any responsibility. Okay? Example, family dinners. Okay? Sometimes at your family dinners, do people quarrel? Yeah, I assume that in my country, people quarrel at family dinners. I assume that's universal. You love those people, but you also sometimes get into quite vicious fights at family dinners. Now, you know your family members really well, don't you? And they know you really well. And they know what your buttons are, and you know what their buttons are. And by button, I mean things that people are sensitive about. Okay? So you know that your brother or sister is very sensitive about, for example, their weight. So you say, oh, when you walk in for the family dinner, you say, oh, you look really healthy. It looks like you've been eating well. And it sounds good, but you know that your brother is sensitive about his weight, and you know it's gonna, and he's gonna feel, oh, she's criticizing me because I'm too fat now. So then your brother gets upset and says, why are you talking to me like that? And you say, all I said was you look healthy. That's all I said. Why are you so sensitive? Okay. So in this situation, we are responsible, not for their being upset, but we're responsible for our harsh words. We're responsible for our devious intention to inflict pain on somebody else. But we deny all responsibility for that. And we just tell our brother that he's too sensitive. Okay, you see what I mean? That we take responsibility for what's not our responsibility, like our friend getting upset, and we blame them about something. And we don't take responsibility for what is our responsibility, like our crafty little to our brother. Okay? So I think all of this is related to self-hatred. How? When we take responsibility for how other people feel, then we blame ourselves for things that we have no control over. When we deny responsibility for things where we really did have quite a nasty intention, then underneath we feel disquietude. We don't feel comfortable with ourselves because we know what was really going on. Yeah. So that produces a certain kind of self-hatred that it's hard for us to really account for because we are not really willing to admit that we did it accidentally, deliberately. Yeah. You know, accidentally, deliberately. That's what happens. You know, that's what you say to your kids, isn't it? You know, when one child antagonizes the other child, and the child who's the antagonizer says, it was an accident. Yeah, accidentally, deliberately. So we did the same thing. That's why we're childish, separate things. But we know inside that what we did was not very good. So that kind of feeling of, you know, not really owning up, not being honest to ourselves, with ourselves, that creates a certain kind of self-hatred and guilt. Guilt is also related to self-hatred. Yeah, how many of you feel guilty? Yeah. I was telling people yesterday that at a retreat I once led, we divided into groups of the Catholics, the Jews, and the Protestants, and then discussed guilt. And then I asked at the end, which group do you think has more guilt? Protestants lost. Yeah. Protestants, you know, they all know they're going to hell anyway. You know, they don't believe in God properly. So, but no, actually they don't. They think they're the ones who are saved. They're not going to hell. It's the rest of us who are going to hell because we don't believe what they believe. The Catholics, yeah? Any Catholics, former Catholics? Yeah? You grew up with a good dose of guilt, didn't you? Yeah? I mean, somebody died for your sake and you didn't even ask. That's a good reason to feel guilty. Yeah? And you're born with original sin. I mean, you're hopeless before you So that's Catholic guilt. Jewish guilt tops them all. Right, my Israeli friends? Jewish guilt, it's in your genes. Yeah, you got it from your mother. You got it from your father. You just feel guilty because you're never good enough. You're never good enough. You don't make your parents proud enough. So you don't do what your parents want you to do. Okay? So, you know, different religions have different kind of guilt. Yeah. But when we suffer from a lot of guilt, we get very wrapped up in self-hatred. Yeah. Why do I feel guilty? Because I'm such a rotten person. Why am I a rotten person? Well, I made my parents unhappy, not what they wanted me to do. And this guy died for me, and I didn't suffer so much. You know? Why am I guilty? You know, that's why I'm guilty. So what's wrong with me? I hate myself because I make other people suffer. Okay? So again, this is all, in Buddhism we call it conceptuality. Yeah. Conceptuality. Our mind overflowing with conceptions, preconceptions, projections, assumptions, expectations. And because our mind is overflowing with all of that, and we never measure up to what we think we should be, then we feel guilty and we hate ourselves. Wonderful way to spend your life, isn't it? Yeah? And yet this is what we do. we specialize in guilt. And we teach it to our children. And for all those Protestants who don't have enough, we'll teach it to them too. And we have, and also, you know what guilt does to us? Is when we do make a mistake, then we think that the guiltier we feel, the more we are atoning for our mistake. Okay? So you made some kind of mistake. You feel bad about it. Yeah? You have some regret for making that mistake. You don't just leave it at regret. Yeah. You have to suffer because you made a mistake. Only if you suffer are you then undoing the mistake you made. Does our suffering undo the mistake we made? No. Does our suffering eliminate the other person's pain? No. But we somehow feel the guiltier we feel, the more we hate ourselves, the more we tell ourselves how lousy we are, then the more we're making up for our mistake. It's totally illogical, isn't it? 100% pure illogical. And yet when we're not aware of that mechanism in our mind, we keep doing it, thinking that somehow that will make up for what we did. And it doesn't. It just makes us feel worse. And when we feel worse, then we actually do more things that inflict pain on ourselves and on other people. Okay? Anything more about this one of self-hatred and being angry at yourself? Yeah.
She's asking about the not self-hatred, but more about injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we want to understand what is the relation between feeling the injustice that is made from others and what is coming from herself.
You mean when we see a situation
Yes.
that we say is unjust?
Not having the anger, but meanwhile to act.
To
You know,
act. Okay, got it. Okay, one wrong idea we have, only way to combat injustice is anger. That anger is the only possible reaction, emotional reaction we can have for injustice. Yeah, that's what we think. It's wrong. That's not true. If we look at somebody like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, then he can see injustice very well, but he's not angry about it. And he responds instead with compassion. So if you look, if you go to his teachings, there's been devastation in his homeland. He's been a refugee for over 60 years. There's been ecological devastation, a whole lot of problems. Very unjust what the Beijing government is inflicting on the Tibetans. And yet His Holiness is not angry about it. And he tells the Tibetans not to be angry. Why? Because anger doesn't do any good. And when once asked about that, he said, if I'm angry, yeah, how's it gonna ameliorate the situation? It just means if I'm angry that I can't eat well, I can't sleep well. Yeah, it doesn't change the situation, it doesn't improve it at all. So he responds to injustice. He responds to injustice with compassion. And the idea behind that is when there's injustice, we usually say there's a victim and a perpetrator. And so we usually have lots of compassion for the victim and lots of anger at the perpetrator. Yeah? But actually, if we look deeper, why is the perpetrator behaving in that way? It's because they're unhappy. Yeah. Why does any human being or any sentient being do something to harm another sentient being? It's because they're unhappy. If they were happy, they wouldn't do what they're doing. Because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, it's so beautiful out, and the sun is shining, and I have friends, and I feel really good today. I think I'm going to go inflict suffering on someone. Nobody thinks like that, do they? Yeah. Why do people inflict suffering? Because they're unhappy and they're confused. Are unhappy and confused people, should they be objects of anger or should they be objects of compassion? They're objects of compassion, aren't they? And especially if we think, if this person, may this person be happy, yeah, may they be free of whatever it is inside them that's making them so confused and unhappy that they think that by treating somebody else unfairly, that will make them happy. May they be free of all of that and have peaceful mind. That would be much more realistic than wishing that person harm. Because if they were happy, it's true, they wouldn't be doing the harmful action that they're doing. Isn't it? Yeah. Because we all know, if we flip the situation, yeah, we've all done harmful things to other people. When you've done harmful things, was your motivation because you felt so contented and satisfied and peaceful? No, your motivation was you were unhappy. And you were so confused, we're so confused that we think that doing this action will bring us happiness. That's how confused we are. Actually, it brings other people unhappiness. It makes us more unhappy. So if we can look at ourselves and have some compassion for when we get into that state, then we can start to look at other people and have compassion for them in similar situations.
Do we need to have some action and to do some punishment? Because I'm doing some work that I'm involved in this kind of situation. So, do we need to take action for the injustice or the punishment?
Action and punishment are two different things.
With compassion.
Yeah, I'm going to punish you with compassion. Yeah. The famous thing, why a parent beats their child. I'm doing this for your own good. Bang, 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 to the screaming child. Yeah. Taking action and punishing somebody are two completely different things. When you were a kid, how well did being punished work for you to get you to change your behavior? Some people, not at all. Some people, maybe you were afraid of getting punished again because it hurt. So you changed your behavior. But did you change your behavior out of wisdom because you saw why that behavior is unsuitable? Or did you change your behavior out of fear? And if you didn't have anything to fear, you'd go do it again. Okay? Punishment does not work well as a deterrent. Okay? That doesn't mean that we don't take action. We must take action if one person is harming the other person. Yeah. But there's many ways to take action. Sometimes you can divert the other person's attention. The harmer's intention, you divert their attention to something else, and they get confused and they stop harming. Or sometimes you may need to intercede physically to prevent them from harming somebody else. But that doesn't mean you need to kill them. In the US, now there's been a lot of talk about police brutality. I'm not sure how much you learn about.
Yeah.
You've seen the videos
Yeah.
of some of those? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. You can see in those, then the officers say, but my life was in danger. You can see in those videos that the officer's life wasn't in danger. Even if they felt that it was, there are other ways to stop somebody from harming you without killing them. There's many other ways. There's one police department now. I read about this, and they're in a town where there's a very high crime rate. So they're really trying something unusual. So one day there was one guy who walked into a store. It was a deli, I think, a restaurant, and he was upset. He was angry. He grabbed a knife. He threatened some people. He walked outside. He's walking down the street, waving this butcher knife around. Okay. Now, ordinarily, a cop would have a good excuse for shooting that person. Okay? He's threatening people with a weapon. The cops didn't do that. The guy's walking down the street waving his weapon. They called for reinforcement. So they stayed away from the guy, but they walked around, they surrounded him so that they were all walking down the street together. So there's no way that guy could go and attack somebody else. The police were at a distance from him, but they were all walking with him down the street together and talking to him and saying, you know, drop the knife, just drop it, give us the knife, whatever. Eventually, the guy dropped the knife. Yeah. Then they were able to arrest him. They did what they needed to do. And nobody was hurt. It took more time than shooting somebody. But it was a much better result. Okay? So sometimes people are doing things where they are dangerous to themselves or other people. We may need to imprison them for a while to help them calm down. But the purpose of the imprisonment should not be to punish, it should be to help. Yeah. The big thing that is wrong with most prison systems is that the motivation is to punish. And people don't want to spend money on programs that would actually help the incarcerated people change their ways, get an education, and so on. If we were smart, we would have all these programs that really help them. But instead, you know, we have a society that likes to punish. And it really doesn't do much good. Did you know in one state in the US, in Arkansas, the governor wants to, the news reaches Italy, you know, he wants to kill 8 people within, you know, before the end of the month, execute, you know, 8 people. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous.